everything's good to go. I've had to jump on a couple programs here. We are in chapter 5, and sorry, I was trying not to blow you out there. I had to sneeze. In 1 Timothy chapter 5, this is our 7th lesson. Of course, the book itself was written to Timothy from Paul in around 63 A.D., and it was addressing the fact that, Paul had been at the church there at Ephesus back, and I'm trying to make this screen a little bit bigger so I can read it better. There we go. And he had warned them previous to this letter that in Acts 20, 29 and 30 tells us, Paul says, I know that after I leave, savage wolves will come in among you and will not spare the flock. Even from your own number, men will arise and distort the truth in order to draw away disciples after them. That was a statement Paul had made, and it appears that it, in fact, had come to fruition. And Paul wrote a letter to him to help with encouragement, instructions, as he worked there in Ephesus, because we all need that sometimes. And the book started out, Paul started out, just a quick overview, he started warning Timothy of false doctrine, and then he gave him a charge of this is what you need to be doing. Then he started covering some basics about what needs to be done in the church and how it needs to be done. He talked about prayer and women and elders and deacons, how to recognize that those who have fallen away or have fallen off under false teaching. And he also basically taught to him, and we finished this up last week, about what a good minister should do during times of that, people falling away from the faith, following false teachers that basically Paul had predicted. And tonight we're going to be covering in chapter 5. Paul's just hold down through here 5 and 6. He's talking about and he's given him instruction concerning various groups and duties and what he needed to be doing and not doing and so forth. And tonight he's specifically talking towards widows, and then we get into elders as well. And we're continuing the instructions for the church from chapter 4 here. But as we start in chapter 5, there's a break there, and now he starts talking about elders. And he says in chapter 5, verses 1 and 2, it says, do not rebuke an older man harshly, but exhort him as if he were your father. Treat younger men as brothers, older women as mothers, and younger women as sisters with absolute purity. Now we need to remember this letter was primarily directed towards Timothy, of course, but we can glean good practices from that as well. And Paul had just told Timothy in 4:12, a few verses before that, don't let anyone look down on you because you're young, but set an example for believers in speech, in conduct, in love, in faith, and in purity. As we move forward, I'm going to break this into several. This is a long section here. 3 through 16 is a pretty long section. And I'm going to break it down into 3 groups. 3 through 8 is talking about widows, and I put in quotes, indeed. 9 and 10 is the list, which we'll cover, and then young widows as we move forward from there. So I'm going to pick up in verse 3, and it says, and I quote, give proper recognition to those widows who are really in need. Important aspect there. But if a widow has children or grandchildren, these should learn first of all to put their religion into practice. It's an interesting statement there. They must first learn to put their religion into practice, and we'll cover that. And it says, by caring for their own family and so repaying their parents and grandparents, for this is pleasing to God. The widow who is really in need and left all alone puts her hope in God and continues night and day to pray and to ask God for help. But the widow who lives for pleasure, now notice that it says lives for pleasure, but the widow who lives for pleasure is dead even when she lives. Give the people these instructions so that no one may be open to blame. Anyone who does not provide for their relatives, and especially for their own household, has denied the faith and is worse than an unbeliever. Whew. That's a pretty harsh statement there in the last bit, doesn't it? Anyone who does not provide for their relatives or especially for their own household has denied the faith and is worse than an unbeliever. We'll talk about that here in just a second. Well, maybe we'll talk about it right now. Honor your mother and father, right? All of y'all have heard that, right? But it also shows a lack of love. If you think about it, 1 Corinthians 13, well, the whole 1 Corinthians chapter 13, if you think about it, the love chapter, it talks about how important it is. But 13:13 tells us, and now these three remain. Y'all probably heard this: faith, hope, and love. But the greatest of these is love. Think about that a minute. And then 1 Timothy 1:14 tells us, the grace of our Lord has poured out on me abundantly. This is Paul talking. He says, the grace of the Lord has been poured out upon me abundantly, along with the faith and love that are in Jesus Christ. Now, if the love that was in Jesus Christ has been poured out on us, shouldn't we be loving like Jesus Christ loved? Well, sure. Well, and if we're loving like Jesus Christ loved, he even loved the people that were with him are going, you're talking to that person? You're forgiving that person's sin? They were blown away. It would be unbelievable if Jesus wouldn't be taking care of his mother or his other family. I mean, that would go way and far beyond what anybody would think. And that statement there, he has denied the faith and is worse than an unbeliever. What is, it's very strong terms. And we've talked about this a little bit. And this is there's currents that run through the Bible. Forgiveness, love, we need to be the Great Commission. But another current that is in the Bible that we have to remember that is reflected in a lot of these different things is we have to be careful of what other people think of us because it can turn them away from God. And this is all about, one, staying saved, getting to know the truth, becoming saved, and attracting others to the message and to Jesus Christ so they can be saved. Now, there are some people that will, no matter what you do, will be negative and be, you're, this, that, or the other, and you have to go on with your life. But man, what would you think if, especially somebody at the time, there was no welfare, no, all that sort of stuff. Mom and dad are out sleeping on the streets. How would that reflect on Jesus Christ and on Christians? How would that impact other people coming to Jesus Christ or not coming to Jesus Christ? Remember, some of the Pharisees were chastised about going, I don't have any money for my parents because I'm giving it all to God. That one was brought up too, wasn't it? But as we look back, there is a couple of things I wanted to say there. Really in need, give proper recognition to those widows who are really in need. Now, he'll go on to talk about that a little bit more as we go down through this. So he'll start to explain who should be and who shouldn't be. But though the second line there and into the third line there, it says, those should learn first of all to put their religion into practice, caring and loving for others. And if you can't care and love, especially for your family, especially those immediately in what nuclear family, I think that's what they called it in school growing up, your immediate mom, dad, brother, sister, so forth. If they need something and you're not helping them with it, if you can, what does that say? But it does go on to say when they do that, this is pleasing to God. Right there in print for us to read. So as we move on here, and I think I'm going the right way. Yes, I am going the right way. Verse 9. This is 9 and 10 cover what Paul refers to the list. And I'll talk about what that was, we believe, once we read the verses. It starts out in verse 9, says, no widow may be put on the list of widows unless she is over 60, has been faithful to her husband, and is well known for her good deeds, such as bringing up children, showing hospitality, washing the feet of the Lord's people, helping those in trouble, and devoting herself to all kinds of good deeds. Now, there's a lot of discussion. I spent quite a bit, I spent a little bit researching the list here. We're tempted to assume that the list was just a general list of widows who were being helped by the church. But that really doesn't hold up. To assume the list is just all the widows in the church. That means, stop and think about what it means. That means they wouldn't be able to help a widow who's 59. Well, that's what it means. Wouldn't be able to help any of them that, were just a normal member, quote unquote, that was taken, that, say, I don't know. There's a litany of things of widows that wouldn't have been able to be put on that list. But that goes against the whole thing of love of someone that is really in need. So there's quite a bit of commentary there about belief that this was something they were doing in Ephesus, specifically for older widows that really had, stood out and so forth and so on. And I started thinking of people. Have you ever been, first of all, okay, another thing. Many scholars believe there was an arrangement with this group that is referred to. And we'll see here in a minute where it talked about going back on their pledge. So it appears that there was an agreement between a certain group and the church or the church leaders. Who here has ever been in a congregation that had an older widow lady working in the church office? Yeah, quite a few of us. And we'll cover it here in a few minutes. And when it gets down to elders, it talks about they can be paid. Now, granted, I don't know any that are paid. But, if you have an elder in a church that's struggling, Who here has ever been in a church that had an elder that may have been struggling and did things, worked for the church, and they compensated him for that, i.e., maybe mowing the lawn? I know of churches that you'll have elders mow the lawn. Well, you got to pay somebody. You're going to pay a company to do it that has no association, or, that's kind of the right thing to do as we talk about it. Seems like almost every church I've ever been in that had a secretary, a lot of the times it was if it wasn't the pastor's wife, it was an older lady in the church that was a widow. Does a lot of things. Think about it. Helps her financially. 5 to 6 days a week, she's up at the building, so people are checking in on her. She's okay today because I don't need to check on her today because she came to work. Keeps her plugged in. Keeps her around people. Is that not a benefit to both the widow and the church? Who here is known of having widows clean the church building and they paid them? Yeah. In my 100% thought, this very well could be part of what that list comprised of. Older ladies that needed more help, that maybe not have had kids, and they say, you know what? Why don't you come up here and work for the church? I personally, when you're looking at a secretary, especially if it's an older lady that lives alone, doesn't have any children close, because sometimes that's the case. There's some here that don't have any children in the same immediate town. I can see several of y'all that don't have children in the immediate town. And if they were to work at the building, man, it helps them and also helps protect them, because we know they're okay, because we love them. See, it comes back to that whole love thing, doing the right thing. Now, that is purely a speculation on my part of what could have been part of this list. But quite frankly, some people have said, well, why don't we have that? Well, we weren't given enough information about it to be able to do it. And no offense, if God wanted us to have a separate list, He would have given us the information to be able to carry out what He wanted done. He did not. Now, that does not mean there's anything wrong with them having this list, so don't take it in that way. But at the same time, I see it as most people see it, that, it was okay to have this separate group that they did a little more for. They're still taking care of the others too. But that's not something God has given us enough information about to be able to implement. And God's smart enough to know if He wants us to implement something, He's going to give us enough information about it to be able to do it. So there you go. That's the whole list thing there. Okay, as we move on, verse 11 through 16. Now this is dealing with the title, quote unquote, young widows. And it goes on and says, as a younger widow, do not put them on such a list, for when their sensual desires overcome their dedication to Christ, they want to marry. Thus they bring judgment on themselves because they have broken their first pledge. What? First pledge? What is this all about? Does that mean they can't get remarried? Absolutely not. It has nothing to do with that. Now, there are people who will try to stretch that, but that's not the case. Jesus has point blank told us, if this, then this. Matthew 9:19 talks about marriage, and that if your spouse is cheated on or they have died, you can be remarried. This harkens back to that list thing. Do not put them on such a list. For when their sensual desires overcome their dedication to Christ, they want to marry. They're very well, and it's believed by many, that there could be part of that agreement around the list was that, okay, you're going to dedicate your service to Christ and the church. That is believed by most people what this pledge was. Well, all right, we're going to make this agreement. I'm going to pledge to dedicate my life to the church and Christ. You know, you need something done around here, I'm going to do it. Okay, I'm going to come clean, or, you know, or be a greeter, or whatever it may be. That's what this is about. But you must be careful, because there are some people who say, oh, see there, they can't get remarried. Well, that absolutely contradicts other parts of the Bible and direct words out of Jesus Christ's mouth. And as we move on, it says, besides, they get into the habit of being idle and going about from house to house. And not only do they become idlers, but they also become busybodies who talk nonsense, saying things they ought not to. So I counsel younger women to marry, to have children, to manage their homes, and this is a hugely important part right here, and to give the enemy no opportunity for slander. And that's for all of us, but he was talking here in the things of women, of widows, excuse me. Some have, in fact, already turned away to follow Satan. You know, that's kind of touched upon in multiple locations. Who here has heard and it's been a long time since I've heard it. I was a kid since I've heard it, but it's true. There was actually a Futurama episode about this, but idle hands are the devil's workshop. You know, isn't that true? I mean, really it is. If we're busy doing something all the time, or we're busy doing this, no offense, we don't have time to get in trouble. I laugh, y'all know I like old VW bugs, and y'all know I like old trucks and stuff, and I follow Facebook pages that are associated with this, and and motorcycle, but there's hardly a week that goes by that someone doesn't post a meme that says, teach your kids to love fill in the blank. VW bugs, old trucks, motorcycles, whatever it is. And there's generally a picture of somebody working on whatever is inserted on that line. And then the bottom it says, because they'll never have money for drugs and they'll always be too busy to get in trouble. And, you know, in some ways, it's pretty good advice. You know, yeah, when I was growing up, I wanted nothing more to be fishing. I wanted to go fishing. Growing up on that camp, we had lakes. I was fishing all the time. Now, it kept me out of a lot of trouble. Kind of got me in trouble sometimes when I didn't clean my room because I was fishing. But there's some truth in that for all of us. And you can look at 2 Thessalonians 3:11 and Psalm 16:27, and it all kind of refers to that type of statement. But something else I want to point at here. You know, some people like, oh, well, Paul is just so disrespectful of women. Stop it. Look at what he said here. So I counsel younger women to marry, to have children, to manage their homes, and to give the enemy no opportunity for slander. Oikos, the Greek word, oikos, means home. Despotio means to rule. The word that they translated to manage is oikos desputios. Two Greek words combined to make a word which really says to rule the home. Now, we know the wife is to be subject to the husband. But you can really look at this, be the queen of the house. You know, and it's wise for husbands to listen to their wives concerning the household. Now, especially then, it was more traditional where the husband generally went out, general terms here, not all of them. And the lady took care of a lot of stuff. You know, when I was at Scripps and working full time, we were doing really good. And Karen didn't have to work for money. She stayed at home. And I've said this many, many, many times. You know what Karen did for us? She provided time for us as a family. She took care of everything. She took care of the grocery store, the finances, Paul back and forth to school, making sure things are, one right after the other. Pretty much I mowed the lawn, went to work, and cooked the meals because I like to cook. The blessing that was, so many people today sadly don't know. I remember one Friday night, Karen and I were out on a date, went to the movies, left the movies, and we were going to run by Walmart on the way home. And there was a couple in our Sunday school class with their two little kids in Walmart at 10 o'clock at night. They were slamming Mountain Dews, the kids, because they both worked all day long. They didn't have time to go on a date. They didn't have time for family time because they were both gone. Karen did all those things so we could be a family when I was home. Karen said, hey, this needs to be fixed. We fixed it. Even nowadays, Karen's like, hey, what about? Okay. What about? Okay. Yeah, I'm just going to be blunt when I want to buy something. I'm like, hey, Karen, how are we doing? Because she keeps the books. It's a blessing. They're not some servant-slave thing that some people want to try to make them out to be. They are a partner to us. Yes, someone has to have their hands on the wheel. My analogy about you can't have two people on the steering wheel or you're going to have a wreck. One person has to drive, and the guy driving better be paying attention to his wife. Because if she wants to stop at the rest stop because she has to use the restroom, you better do it. That analogy again. But I wanted to point out that word there, and literally, rule the home is what it would be translated as if it was two particular different words. And it goes on to say in 16, if any woman who is a believer has widows in her care, she should continue to help them and not let the church be burdened with them, so that the church can help those widows who are really in need. Paul again pointing out the responsibility of the Christian to take care of their family. Because that's, it all comes back to that example that we're setting for those both in and out of the body of Christ. Because we can set either a good example or we can set a bad one. And we really playing with fire if we're setting a bad example for people when we're a Christian. We're about to hit another section there. You know what? I'm going to stop right here because we've got like a minute left instead of trying to rush through the next part. Next week we may be able to finish up 1 Timothy next week. If not, it'll be just a recap with a little bit of scripture the week following. Thank you for joining us this evening. We hope you all have a wonderful evening and hope to, and carbonation, and hope to see you here with us at some point.